Thank you for checking out this ResearchCraft interview. I'm Robert Carl. Part of my motivation for this series stemmed from a desire to deepen fleeting interactions I was having with interesting people on academic Twitter. My guest this episode is Jayson Porter, who is one of my favorite follows. A Ph.D. candidate in Mexican history at Northwestern University, Jayson maintains an inspiring online presence as he shares questions and insights from his day-to-day research, as well as honest assessments about academic and personal life. Jayson's work on contemporary Mexican affairs and Black ecologies can also be found in outlets such as Black Perspectives, the blog of the African American Intellectual History Society, as well as Noria Research and NACLA. This interview showcases both Jayson's fascinating work on the environmental history of 20th century Mexico and also introduces us to research strategies with wide applicability. Enjoy. Well, Jayson, thank you so much for coming on ResearchCraft. I'm really thrilled to get to talk to you again. Actually, we did a preliminary chat almost a year ago that we unfortunately didn't record, which was a shame. But anyway, thank you for coming on. Just introduce yourself. Tell us about your really exciting research.
Yeah. Well, my name is Jayson Porter. I am a PhD candidate at Northwestern University up here in Chicago. I'm currently in Chicago in my room. And I study environmental history, principally of Mexico. And my project is it's a weird one. It's a kind of a commodity study, looking at commodity chains. It's also kind of a study of slow structural violence, really looking at market violence tied to those commodity chains. And it's also kind of a study of social movements on the ground as well in Mexico. So I look at the history of oil seeds principally. Now, most plants produce oil, and most plants have oil in their seeds, but some um, plants beyond the biological, or excuse me, the botanical term of being an oil seed have more an economic term of being oil seed and are produced for that oil in particular. From peanuts to cotton to coconuts to marijuana and opium, these are in the oilseed variety because it is in their oil the value lies. And I look at these oils principally because I think they tell the story of the coastal Guerrero and many parts of Sinaloa. Coastal Guerrero in particular has had a political economy tied to oil seeds that goes back to the Aztec Empire and Triple Alliance rule when they forced the Tlapanec, the Amusco, and the Mixtec peoples to contribute in cotton. Once the Spanish came, their haciendas were comprised of cotton plantations and enslaved African people. Later on,
and just to orient anyone who's watching who's not as familiar with the geography of Mexico, we're talking Pacific coastal Mexico, correct?
We are indeed. We are indeed. So southern, the state of Guerrero, on the coast of that straddle Acapulco.
And
So
Sinaloa is farther up the
and seen a
coast.
little bit farther up on the coast as well. So my project looks at these oil seeds to do the investigation. I look at a series of archives from military archives to the archives of the National Agriculture School. I also spend time in the National Agrarian Archives looking at Ejido records. I spent some time in Salud, the health records as well. What else? Local archives in Sinaloa and in Guerrero. There are very few local archives in Guerrero, but there is a nice group of archivists in Chilpancingo in the capital who do have comprised what they can, and I've spent a lot of time there. And what else?
And what's roughly the time frame of the project?
Yeah, so the time frame of project is roughly 20th century. So my narrative goes from 1930s to 1970s. Um, and I think, and one of the reasons why I'm trying to look at this period, I think is oftentimes the arc of the Mexican economy is tied to oil, petroleum, it's tied to the Green Revolution. But I think by looking at oil seeds and the type of oil chemistry that was necessary to have the petroleum chemistry that really blows up in the later 20th century, the mid 20th century, you had an oil seed boom around plants that were rubbery, waxy, and slick. And you had biopiracy and extractive colonial and neo-colonial projects around getting these substances for the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. So I think by looking at these oil seeds, you can go prior to the oil boom in Mexico, which was huge in the 1920s and really kind of carries on in many ways. And it ties the Mexican mural to the Green Revolution, which I also think we can deepen understanding of when Mexico's agriculture, um, uh, became a big part of its relationship with other countries, namely the United States, but also other parts of its own country, various countrysides, various different groups of people who at this time didn't necessarily identify as Mexican in the way that they might today. So I think that looking at oil seeds in a couple regions that are known for um, uh, 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 the epicenters of agriculture, but also epicenters of social unrest. I think we can get a better understanding of how those extractive economies influence these regions, but more importantly, how these regions shape these economies, shape their politics, and shape the environmentalism that came out of those regions as well.
Great. Yeah, it's such a great project and pulls on touches on so many different historiographical threads, whether it's sort of the high point of the Mexican Revolution in the 1930s to its exhaustion as we get towards the 1980s, whether it's sort of the history of import substitution, industrialization, and the history of development. So you're taking a really novel perspective on those larger questions that have interested historians of both Mexico and Latin America for a long time. So super ambitious project. How do you manage all the pieces of this, all these local archives, the research on the ground, the sort of file management, well, actually, let me ask you to start with secondary sources, because I think you have a really amazing system for tackling these.
Yeah. So secondary sources, honestly, I tackle secondary sources not that much different than I tackle primary sources. I try to put them in a system of sorts, and I'm really basic. I use kind of two major things, so Tarot and Word documents. So what I really like with books and other secondary sources is I think repetition matters personally. I think repetition matters not just so you can remember things at the moment of use, right? But that you can think of things and remember things while you're conceptualizing your project as you're going through and narrating, as you're trying to think about, the silences that you don't know about, the erasures that they're unknown to you. So in many ways, I don't necessarily try to create a system that's based off of that's kind of rooted around me finding or remembering a source when I need to put it in. More or less, me trying to like spend time with sources as much as possible so they can sit with me. So one thing I really realized that if I don't spend, and it's gonna sound crazy, or it maybe doesn't. If I don't spend 12, 14 hours with the text, then I really just don't really remember main parts of it a year later. Like it just kind of just like it just really just kind of goes away completely, like completely. Um, and so one, take pretty exhaustive notes, and then I try to keep note systems. So I don't have them many on the computer that I'm working from now. But I used to keep these large files that are kind of like, let's say, like environmental history in Latin America, or biomedicine in Latin America, or history of roads in Mexico, or eradication projects in Mexico. And what I would do is these were like thematic lists that I would have, sections of book notes in. And I kind of keep them like that. So I have a lot of just kind of contact zones where I like see I have this I see the text again, the material that I kind of find most interesting, and I see it in context with other things that I think other texts that I think are valuable as well. I also put a lot of my secondary sources in Zotero, and I like to keep a lot of my notes in there as well, and use a lot of the keyword. So in that sense, I really kind of keep my secondary sources and my primary sources in really similar ways, because with primary sources, especially if they're books or if they're longer texts, I oftentimes keep them in a thematic thing, which I'll kind of talk about a little bit later with kind of my notes in time and my field notes, is just really kind of how I organize things for like writing purposes.
Yeah, I loved this idea when we spoke last year about notes in time. So maybe you can introduce that to us.
All right, so notes in time. So I this is actually for an archive. So this is secondary sources because this is from a hemeroteca. Um, Principally at hemeroteca, or like a grouping of a newspaper archive, at the Biblioteca de Miguel Lerdo, de Tejada in Mexico City. And there was basically a one revista Tiempo that I really found interesting. So what I would do is as um, I would every night when I'd go through and take pictures, I would take pictures during the day, and every night I would kind of read some of them. I would organize, put them in Zotero, and make sure that they're filed away. So I actually have like the archives, so I can show you like kind of how I kept them. So I think if I go to, so yeah, so here's Revista Tiempo. So you can see kind of how I kept them. So every day I would plug them in. And then I would name them. I kind of keep it fresh because I think you can think of more things while it's kind of fresh. So I would always leave the archive a little early every day, just so I spend some time on organizing. So you can see how I have Tiempo set up here, and I can click on it and I can look up the particular file. But what I would do for the notes in time is just kind
Well,
of while
sorry,
I'm
could I pause you for
yeah,
just one sec? And
absolutely.
those folders you have all these pages from El Tiempo that you've digitized, photographed, and then you have them in these thematic folders. Is that
Yes,
right?
absolutely. This one's a thematic on agrarismo and pistarismo. This one's on just agriculture generally. This one's on opium. This one's on like politics and Guerrero. This one's on, so each of these kind of open up into other groupings. This one's just on oil seeds, particularly on soap. This one's on pesticides and kind of plagues. So yeah, so these are kind of done thematically, and the ones that don't necessarily fit in their own category, I kind of just kind of put them like this. But what I like to do is to make sure that I'm keeping notes while I'm reading over these sources. I keep a notes in time. So it's just basically a timeline of everything. Everything that I'm reading on a particular source, be usually at the archive level or the chapter level. So for this one, I just have it so you can see the date of the publication at the end, but the starting date is actually when the such event took place, and it lets me just kind of see things in order. I usually do asterisk for important, double asterisk for like this needs to be in the chapter.
Likewise, yeah.
Um, and I think it's just easy to keyword search, but I think it's nice to put in the front because you can see it. I started one spoon in the back, and you really kind of can't. So this is kind of how I do notes in time. They get pretty lengthy, but they're all keyword searchable. But it allows me to see, hundreds of different newspapers, different dates, because some of these dates aren't the year, right? So it just tries to help me see them in order. And what I'll do when I'm making a notes in time, let's say if I think I have one for chapter. So what I would do is, so when I start making, so this was for chapter 3 on sesame seeds, mostly in Sinaloa. So what I would do is I would kind of create a timeline in the very beginning, and I would go through all of my notes in time, copy and paste them, and make another timeline. And this kind of timeline will be the start of my chapter. And then from this, once I kind of have all this listed out, like all my primary sources that are going to go into this chapter, then I go, and then at the end of the notes in time, I have it broken down into secondary source level. So this pamphlet that came out. So these dates aren't timeline specific, right? So it's kind of, they're in conversation, these two. So that's kind of how I divide them in the same. So once I get the notes in time for a chapter, what I do is I make a topic sentence outline. So I usually, so this you can see I start with an anecdote, then the next paragraph, I talk about Sesame Seed's commercial empire and environmental change at the macro level. Then I talk about ecology, drought. I kind of bring, this is like kind of my opening. Then I hit it with the theoretical Sesame Seeds and structural violence. Then I jump into my first kind of case study, section 1. And what I like to do is I like to, these are basically my topic sentences are going to root each of these paragraphs. So this is going to be, this ended up being a 48 paragraph chapter, right? I think it ended up being 13,500 words. So what I'll do is I'll send this outline to my advisor. So he literally can say like, I think you should probably move this paragraph up. I don't think this paragraph's necessary, you know, and then I can go for that. And it really gives me good confidence moving forward in my chapter. If my advisor already really likes the direction, he can see where it starts, where it's moving, you know, how I'm going through it. And, you know, sometimes it shrinks down, you know, sometimes one of these ends up being 2 paragraphs. Sometimes 3 of these end up being 1 paragraph, right? And I just realized I can scrunch them up, but it really helps me kind of stay oriented. So that's kind of how I move from archive to individual, from notes in time with archive, notes in time within the chapter, to actually making a chapter outline, to then actually writing the chapter paragraph to paragraph. And I keep the paragraphs numbered until the very end. Like the paragraph numbers are one of the last things I delete. And I literally, I copy and paste this onto a new document, and I start paragraph 1. And if I get lost, I look down and I you know, I get reoriented. And I always have my notes in time there to kind of look at the absolute, you know, verbatim, um, uh, you know, so what it's absolutely was said, you know, at the chapter, you know, so I can say, oh, what was that in 1953? You know, what date was that? So I always kind of moving back and forth.
This is really a remarkable system. And I think on the whole, one of the things that so impressed me about your workflow is the discipline that you're able to maintain. In terms of doing the notes in time, really keeping on top of looking at the processing, reading over notes in the archive at the end of every day. That takes a lot of work, and as I said, a lot of discipline to do. And that outline is really, really remarkable as well. I mean, one recommendation I might make in terms of software, Scrivener would really allow you to, because your writing is already so modular, Scrivener would allow you to just sort of drag and drop the paragraphs to reorder them rather than copying and pasting, which I think, again, your writing style really lends itself to that.
Yeah.
So, but let me ask a couple questions. One, how do you manage sort of the notes and time files when they get really big? So, you know, because you're scrolling through, you know, these things inevitably balloon to themselves 40, 50 pages.
Yeah. So one is I'm like really into like and post-it notes. And so again, like I think writing things down like just helps you kind of like integrate them into your day, like into that, like into this moment where you're spending with these sources. So yeah, I sometimes just like to write things down, and I don't have them right now because I usually write outside of my room. But like a whole wall full of, you know, post-it notes that kind of just help things over. And then one thing, I keep different notebooks. So like one that's more political. So I can show. So here there's just like 2. So like one notebook that's like super political and one's environmental. So, and I keep them dated. So, and I keep those notes because I like to look back at the notes I took while I was in the archive. Because sometimes I'm just like, you know, oh wow, there's so much content on this and this, but it's not like something I actually took pictures of. So it helps me like stay refreshed. So I like to keep those different notebooks, just so I can just kind of like stay fresh at the moment. But I think it's kind of illusion to think that you can keep everything fresh and keep everything in mind. And I don't particularly, other than kind of the respect, just knowing that like it just takes a lot of time for, you know, something to kind of to sit with. and I'm just not really good at skimming. I just don't really, I just really have to pick and choose when I'm going to read and read it closely kind of person. Um, so, I just kind of have to, I really just kind of have to cut my losses. But I think what really helps me is the organizing in the beginning with the
Yeah.
chapter outline, because it helps me like, oh, sugar, I forgot that part. Like, oh, sugar. And that I really take, I honestly takes me about 5 weeks, 5 weeks to do the first notes in time and to come up with the chapter outline. And then at that point, it probably takes me about 5 weeks to write the chapter completely from like start to like I'm ready to submit it. Like so usually, 3.5 weeks to write, a couple weeks to like edit, and then like a couple weeks to just like refine and polish, right? So, or not a couple weeks, a couple days to refine and polish. So it ends up being like a 10. It's so far it has been for the first 3 chapters, which I'm going to Hyde Park after this to talk about my first 3 chapters with my committee member down there, and so I'm a little nervous. But so you might be like, this didn't work very well.
Maybe you could share your screen again and show us a little bit how you organize the archival files themselves, the pictures that you're taking in the archive.
Yeah, so that is it differs from archive to archive. So with the AGN,
Which is the general archive
yeah,
of the nation
the
in Mexico
yeah,
City.
the general archive. Um, sugar. This is not the file I want to open right now. Hold on.
This is actually instructive in its own way because one of the things that I thought after our first discussion about your research last year was the fact you have your research materials really divided up into different folders based on the archival trip.
I'm on a different computer than my
Okay.
last. So that was this computer. So yeah, that actually is the computer that I did the research on. So everything's on there fresh and I have it through. It's only through cloud and I've been more selective
Gotcha.
through. So, but yeah, but mostly the things that I kind of keep are, I don't really extract too much outside of like the actual expediente itself. So I'll get the expediente. So this one's 70 pages. This is like from the AGA, or the Agrarian Archive of Mexico, the National Agrarian Archive. And what I'll do is at this level is I will take the sources at the individual level. So like a particular letter that's dated, or a particular complaint or a map. I can have like who wrote it, what was the title, and it's in that I'll put into Zotero. So in Zotero, so this is the dissertation, how I have the dissertation files, but archives, I have them like this. So I can go to the AGA and I have them individual. So this is like the actual informe from this. And these I have keyword searchable. These I have organized by, who's speaking, where they are. I even think that I have them like down to for my most important municipalities and my most important ejidos, I actually break them down to ejido level, which makes it even easier. So but instead of, I don't keep these files, individual files in my computer. I keep them full at the expediente level, and then I plug them in to Zotero individually. That's just been easier for me. But so Zotero is my major file where I like keep most of my individual things from. So these are all the archives that I've gone to in Mexico. So there's
Awesome.
quite a few.
Yeah.
And
And
I, I
we can see in the bottom left corner you're also keyword tagging them
yeah,
as well, which is great. I've always been hesitant to use Zotero for primary sources because archival protocols differ so much from institution to institution, and there's not in my experience, a good way with Zotero to sort of use it to format an archival citation, a primary source, well, an archival citation when I'm actually doing the writing. So have you run into issues with that? Do you have another sort of protocol in place to cite your primary sources, or are you mostly using Zotero as a sort of note-taking
Yeah.
repository?
No, I mean, honestly, I had the slight advantage of I spent a year as a copy editor for the Journal of the Early Republic, and it was such a tedious job. I had my own office, and because I could order up to 500 books at a time to do fact checking and to check all the notes and stuff. And I honestly, I have like, I'm not a runner, so I really can't say if there's like a runner's high for footnotes, but like I definitely have some equivalent to that where like I just know my footnote days. And it helps me like just check them. Like, so I'll put them on from Zotero. I know they're not right, but like I'll go back through them, put them the way I want. So I don't have anything automatic. I just don't usually trust those types of things. Usually, I don't have too much that just like isn't just fine tuned by myself at the end. I mean, it's writing at the end. It's not that. It's not like I. Yeah. I mean, I know I could do a lot better on that time wise, but I don't know. I think I end. Yeah. I don't have a good. I don't have a good system on that necessarily. But I also don't think it's that tedious. You have 120 footnotes a chapter. You deal with a chapter every 2.5, 3 months. Like I just go through it and just like finish it up. Once they're on there, it takes like, you know, so yeah, I think that's definitely something I could kind of improve on, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, we'll stay in touch about that. I'd love
Okay,
to hear
cool.
what you come up with as you tackle, larger as the chapters sort of add on to one another, and the
Yeah,
project becomes really really big.
yeah,
Can I ask you to go back into Zotero, into one of the AGN folders, and show us sort of that almost page by page or document by document breakdown?
yeah,
So go ahead and click. Can you click on one of the entries?
yeah, for sure. So I don't have them. I don't think I have them linked to particular pictures.
Okay.
So, but like this one, you can see like I have like the engineer who wrote it, kind of the title, and like, but this was a 10-page
Mm-hmm.
file, right? And he's writing basically like a kind of an overview. So I know that when I am like, this is just something that, I want to look at the source again when I'm writing about it. So like, I know where to go to and get this because I have Atoyak Kakalutla separate on my file. So, and all of those files I keep on the other computer. So I'll have it on one computer
Okay.
and I'll be able to look at it on the other.
Gotcha.
And then maybe there's a couple notes on this one, just about that I just kind of just pulled from that. But at this one, I don't have that. I don't have too many notes on these primary, but they're just really for so I remember what to
What's
read
there?
about.
Right.
Hmm.
Okay.
And I think these are pretty keyword search too. So like so I can see which ones are for displacement, which ones were like kind of like this interesting fake news, which ones are key sources. So I can say like, okay, I need to before I write, and I think, yeah, I think I like to read a lot of primary sources again right before I write, just to kind of like, have that just I don't know, just so I'm not like reading, looking over my shoulder. You have that kind of confidence like that that you can especially if you're trying to narrate, and especially like environmental history, you want to describe, what type of soil was in a place or I can't remember all that stuff.
Right.
I can't, I don't even try to like, so I'm gonna have to like look at the soil, like, oh, this is type of soil. Okay, how many pigs did they have? If I want to get that type of that close description, like I'm just gonna have to like, okay, bet, like I need to look at, this informe again, like right before, if I'm in that part, like if I'm in
Right.
1930 in July, to probably see what, Ingeniero Gonzalez, Garza had to say, right?
Right.
So that's kind of how I have this set up.
I mean, I love having the tag for key source,
Mm,
and that you have it built in. Okay, I'm going to go back and look at all these relevant folders. And that was
mhm,
in some ways my question about how you handle the larger notes in time files. Because if I'm sort of trying to write up something new in particular, I will go back at my sort of research diary where I have all these random facts written down, and I will I will forget them after a couple months. So, and maybe I should go through it every 6 months, even if I'm not writing, just to remind myself of all these random notes. And I have to say, my research diary is not very well organized. It's just sort of like, I don't know how many years now of 1 or 2 lines, either a thought or more likely like, oh, here's a random aside from a document that might be interesting in the future.
right, right.
Here's a random document I found online somewhere, or defining a name. And I do like those moments when those times when I go back and read through it, because it's sort of this exciting process of rediscovery, right? But I
Right.
often wonder, should I be doing this like on a more regular schedule? Hoping for inspiration and or hoping for just to get like to fall in love with the research material again,
Mhm.
to get a little bit of that particular like archive high.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so for me, to me, that's music. So to me, that's music. So like, I'll only listen to an album when I'm in this archive for an entire 2 weeks. Like I was only listening to Flower Boy by Tyler the Creator when I was in this. So what I'll do is when I'm reading those notes when I'm writing, I'll only listen to Flower Boy.
Amazing.
But and to me that musical association is really big.
Yep.
I
for
also think
for me it was I when I worked on a lot of microfilm during my first research sabbatical, I listened to uh oh man, who did I listen to? I can't even think of it now. Anyway, I listen to the same album all the time, and then every time it's like a Pavlovian response. Every time I sit in front of a microfilm machine, like almost 10 years later, I'm like, I have to listen to this album.
right, right.
Uh,
It's like that thing when it's like that thing when you're making playlists and you take a song out of an album context and you put it into a playlist. And when you're listening to it in the playlist and that song ends, there's almost part of you that's ready for the song that comes next in the album,
yes,
right?
exactly.
Right. And there's that you're remembering what's gonna come next, and then it shifts, right?
Right,
And I think that that's a really interesting, like that's kind of like how you have like these little like memory jolt kind of things,
right,
right?
right. And
Um,
and the album in question was "The Suburbs" by Arcade Fire. Can't
okay.
It's been a while since I've been in front of a microfilm machine. Clearly,
Yeah,
that I
yeah.
couldn't even remember the name. One of the things I admire about you as well is just how open and engaged you are as a public intellectual on Twitter. And I think you're really a model in terms of generosity of sharing both your research materials. I mean, I've read more about oilseeds via your Twitter account than in my professional career. And I worked on the Colombian countryside. So you're involved in a number of initiatives, one of which was working with a team in archives in Mexico to help digitize security service records before they were closed off again. They'd been public for a number of years, and then there was a closing at the archive. Would you be able to talk about that experience and that process?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think I'm gonna get in any trouble for it at this point anymore. But so yeah, so this was um maybe November 2019. We had been hearing for a long time that Mexico City or the Mexican government was going to shut down the EPSA records, or Investigaciones Políticas y Sociales, which essentially are kind of like Mexico's equivalent, like FBI, like surveillance. So basically, there was like these EPSA agents that basically invested different political and social issues that were going on throughout Mexico, starting as early as like the 1920s. So these files go from 1920s all the way up to the 1980s. And basically Mexican government was like, well, we're probably gonna cut these off in the beginning of 2020. And I didn't really believe it, and a lot of people didn't, but they started putting signs up that they might. So I just got a group of friends together, kind of stopped my dissertation research for like 6 weeks, which it's hard to think about it now because I ended up losing so much because of COVID. So like, it was a really tough choice, honestly. But and I just put money into all of them, just just kind of didn't have the time to ask for money because they said they were going to close it January 6th. And really, they closed archives in Mexico City in like the 14th of December.
Yep.
So we only had a couple weeks. But we went in there and we just took probably about 20,000, 30,000 pictures and very sensitive materials, from violence against drug traffickers to violence against people suspected of being communists to violence against women to cover-ups and political assassinations, a whole bunch of stuff. And so basically January 6th comes around. Shout out to my very good friend, Diana Avila Hernandez, who was really, really important in getting this group together and helping out. And she's just amazing, amazing scholar researcher friend. And they were right there the whole time helping. So come January 6th, we go into Ahene and we ask for EPSA records, and they're no longer available. And I took a picture of this new sign that said that they're no longer available, and I posted it on Twitter. I don't. It blew up, this tweet, and I got a direct message from like a senator's assistant. Basically, it was like, how can we bring this to Congress? Not for the right political reasons. I think they really wanted to make the president not look good, right? But so that's why, as a Fulbright researcher at the time, I had to be really careful to stay out of the politics. But I gave them some information about what APSA was and what kind of we did. And they set a motion to keep the first chunk of APSA records open. So to this day, I'm pretty sure the records up to like the 50s are open. So they didn't close them all, but we couldn't keep the ones open from the 60th to the 70th. So the 60s and the 70s. So that was my one little notorious moment. And, honestly, I also have to give a shout out to my advisor, Paul Gillingham, because honestly, I think that he's probably doing the best, most cutting edge work, with Article 19, with his own project, Midas, which is an intelligence records of Mexico, working on declassified records from military archives and EPSA records. So I wouldn't know about EPSA or without working with Paul on Midas for years. So it was it gave me the sense of urgency knowing that Paul would support that type of initiative. So
it's great you had that support. And did sort of that like collective sort of archival rush of just trying to photograph as much as possible, what did it teach you about the research process, whether it was in sort of how you handled the documents themselves or in how you were coordinating with the other people working on the initiative?
It wasn't like super, it wasn't that distinct or anything, like in terms of what we were doing. We're asking for records, we were getting them, we were taking pictures, but it did feel, it wasn't something I liked to do, I'll tell you that much. Like I'll tell you that much. Like it definitely felt like I felt very far removed from the sources. I didn't read anything, and in many ways, like I think like I tried to reach out to scholars. I tried to like get some sense of what I should get.
Right.
But like I felt like I was going after like almost trauma porn, like looking at like what was what might not be accessible later because it's the dirty,
the most sensitive, right?
Because it's the most sensitive. So as a practice, like honestly, like looking for the most sensitive things didn't necessarily. It felt in bad faith. It didn't necessarily feel like, So I definitely had to check myself on that. Because it was all about violence. It was all about people. We had the sense that Mexican military, Mexican government, wasn't as violent against its citizenry, in the second half of the 20th century compared to other Latin American countries, but that's simply untrue. And so this archive proved it. And so it definitely, especially as a gringo, I had to. It was nice that I was working with a whole bunch of Mexican researchers, but it definitely like it's tough because I don't think they would have been able to do. I'm not sure if they would have been able to do it in the same way if I wasn't there. And I think that's problematic.
Yes.
In terms of my access, that's problematic in terms of theirs. I mean,
in the last couple minutes we have, is there anything else you'd like to add or to plug?
I don't need to plug anything. I don't. I'm trying to run away from clout these days. I don't know what it is. And I'm a graduate student. I'm trying to get this done. So shout out to what I want to shout out to. Shout out to man. I almost I got goosebumps. Honestly, shout out to the first years everywhere who are before this process. They might be getting ready to teach and everything, but shout out to them and trying to hold on to some semblance of imagination as they think about what projects they can write. They've been inside this past year and a half and just been scared and just uncertain and just shout out to them. Last night I had a group of first years of color over for dinner, and it was the first time I got a little air filtration thing. It was my first time having a group over, and it was just it just hurt hearing how hard that was. And I do think that our institutions could have made it a little easier, but it was just hard for so many. So plug all the first years, just going through this research. I literally am a little choked up thinking about y'all are just so amazing. I don't want to plug anything on myself right now. I want to plug myself as an outlet. I would love to talk to you if you want to talk about this more closely. If you have any questions, I feel like I ran through a lot and I wasn't super clear on this a lot all the time today. So shout out to the first years. I plug myself as a colleague. I cannot wait, to talk a little bit more about these archives with you. Thank you.
I can think of no one else on history Twitter who's, again, as open and as generous and is really a model for particularly grad students of color who are just starting the process. So thank you for all that you do. Thanks for coming on here again. It's an awesome project. You've got an awesome workflow. And I'm so excited to have had this chance. So thank you again.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure. Research Craft. Such a pleasure. Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this installment of Research Craft. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube page to be updated on new episodes, and also follow me on Twitter and join the conversation. I'm at R.A. Carl.